Today, we're headed back to 1892, Fall River, Massachusetts. A quiet New England town with white picket fences, church bells, and one of the most brutal double murders in American history.
A case so shocking, it turned a Sunday school teacher into a national legend. Or a national monster. I'm Dustin.
And I'm Jimbo.
And this is Dark Discoveries.
Welcome back to Dark Discoveries, and welcome to the first episode of our deep dive series into the life, crimes, trial, and long and strange legacy of Lizzie Andrew Borden. When you hear the name Lizzie Borden, the mind jumps straight to the rhyme, to the murders, to the sensational trial that captivated the nation. But, as with every legend, the story starts long before the infamous moment. Today, we're going to peel back all the layers and explore the world Lizzie lived in before blood stained the Borden home. We'll talk about her upbringing, her family dynamics, the emotional atmosphere she grew up in, and the early seeds of tension that would one day explode into a case still debated more than a century later. This is where the mythology ends and the human story begins, right here in the early life of Lizzie Borden.
And that's the thing. People tend to treat Lizzie as if she sprang into existence fully formed the day that she supposedly axed or hatcheted or whatever she did to her parents. By then, but when you dig into her origins, you start discovering all these little cracks that formed long before 1892. Cracks in her home life, cracks in her relationship with her stepmother, cracks in the rigid Victorian social structure that both elevated and suffocated young women like Lizzie. Today's episode is about understanding those forces and the world she lived in. Before the murder trial, before the crime scene photos, there was a young girl growing up in a complicated household in a rapidly changing city. Understanding the foundation is absolutely critical. So let's step into Fall River, Massachusetts in the mid to late 1800s. We're going to meet the people, the places that shaped Lizzie Borden long before the public ever knew her name.
Fall River, it's a city of two worlds. So to really grasp Lizzie Borden's upbringing, we've got to understand the city that molded her, Fall River, Massachusetts. In the mid-1800s, this place was booming. I mean, you're talking textiles mills roaring day and night, immigrants pouring in, ships loading and unloading at the bustling harbor. Money was flowing throughout the city, and with it came layers of social hierarchy that were almost as rigid as the Victorian morals everyone pretended to uphold. The Borden family belonged to one of Fall River's old established lineages, and depending on which branch you were born into, life could look very different. Some Bordens were the elite of the elite, the kind with sprawling mansions up on the hill, servants catering to every need, and social circles that revolved around lavish parties and charitable galas. But Lizzie didn't grow up in that world. Her father, Andrew, although financially successful, was known for his extreme frugality. He lived far below his means, choosing practical simplicity and in many cases harsh austerity over comfort or status. This created a strange paradox. Lizzie was wealthy by bloodline and family fortune, but she lived like someone of modest means, and that uncomfortable middle ground shaped a lot of her identity.
And that paradox is honestly one of the most fascinating elements of her early life. Because if you picture the wealthy class of Fall River, you imagine elegance, luxury, refined living, but the Borden household was completely the opposite. They lived on 2nd Street, far from the prestigious Hilltop estates. The house was cramped, outdated, and it lacked even the most basic modern amenities, like indoor plumbing. a choice Andrew made deliberately and not out of necessity. Meanwhile, just a few blocks away, the Borden cousins, they were living in near opulence. Lizzie grew up constantly aware of the disparity. She saw how the wealthier relatives lived. She visited their homes with fine furnishings and comfortable arrangements, and she knew her family could technically afford the same thing. But Andrew's tight-fisted philosophy dictated everything from household habits to the very architecture of their daily lives. The environment, one foot in elite society, the other stuck in rigid thrift, really shaped the tension simmering underneath the surface of Lizzie's world.
Now, come on, Dustin. Lizzie's got a point, man. If your dad won't even pay for indoor plumbing and you have to go out to that outhouse.
Dad names you after himself.
I was going to say her middle name is Andrew.
I was waiting to be like, Andrew, like, really, like, is he that full of himself?
But
did
dude,
he want a son that bad that, you know, that's where the disparity starts?
Can you imagine your cousins be like, hey, can we go over to Lizzie's? Don't make us go spend the night at Lizzie's. We got to go outside to use the bathroom.
Toilet. Well, supposedly there was one toilet in the basement. I don't want to go to the basement to take a dump. Like, you know, you got to go outside outhouses, and that's still a luxury in that time frame.
But you know, I wonder where the frugality actually came from. I don't know if we'll dive deeper into Andrew's life at some point. But was he brought up on hardships? And you know how some people come into money and it's hard for them to change their way because they've been frugal their entire life and they don't know how to act any other way.
Her dad was a self-made man. I'm sure we're going to talk about that as we go. I had an uncle that hit the Powerball. He was able to retire early. His wife, my aunt, made him buy a big house on top of a hill with a lake or a pond. Super nice place. The guy still wore the same jeans, white V-neck t-shirts, and suspenders until he died. Like, you didn't know he was a millionaire looking at him. And the money didn't matter. He struggled his whole life. And now they had money, you know, it took some problems away, but it doesn't take them all away. So money's not what it always seems. And I'm going to say this guy it wasn't a thing to him. He already had the mindset, the work ethic already ingrained in his DNA, and he was just going to be himself.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about the Borden family dynamics and upbringing. Lizzie's family structure was rooted in emotional distance and rigid expectations. Born in 1860 to Andrew and Sarah Borden, she tragically lost her mother when she was just a toddler. I mean, that right there, that's got to be enough to damage your future. Though she was a toddler, even let's say she was 2 or 3, you still have those memories of your mother because the lady that comes in, you know, is not the lady that you remember from earlier in life. So did that start the progress of what's going to happen in her life? We'll find out.
Even today, you get treated different as a stepkid than you do some of his own kids. And, you know, given that upbringing, not having your mom, you're going to have some rebellion at some point in life. So, I mean, it's definitely going to add fuel to the fire.
So that kind of loss at such a young age often leaves a psychological imprint, even if the child doesn't consciously remember it. 3 years later, Andrew remarried a woman named Abby Durfee Gray, who stepped into the household as Lizzie's new maternal figure, but the relationship never evolved into anything close to affection. Lizzie and her older sister, Emma, always referred to her as Mrs. Borden, a formal title that spoke volumes. They didn't view her as their mother. They viewed her as an outsider in their own home, and that distance wasn't just emotional. The household was governed by strict Victorian expectations where children, especially daughters, were expected to be obedient, modest, industrious, and deeply religious. Lizzie did all of this. She taught Sunday school, she participated in church missions, she read constantly, and she behaved in a way that fit the mold of a proper young woman. But beneath the surface, there was the stark reality that she, Emma, and Abby were essentially 3 separate emotional islands, all in the same house.
Exactly. And Emma, being 10 years old, naturally stepped into that caretaker role for Lizzie, which further pushed Abby out of the picture. The lines of loyalty were drawn early and drawn hard. For Abby, stepping into the home where the daughters were emotionally united against her must have been challenging. But for Lizzie and Emma, the loyalty to each other mattered more than the formal family unit. The house itself reflected its split. The layout was bizarre, with locked doors and closed off spaces. That forced people to walk through other people's rooms just to reach certain areas. Privacy was non-existent, and mistrust was constant. With that kind of environment where emotional boundaries were unclear and physical boundaries were rigid, this can shape a person's psychology in lasting ways. Lizzie grew up feeling controlled, constrained, and powerless in many aspects of life. All the while, she watched her father make decisions without consulting the daughters, especially when those decisions affected their future. Combine that with the Victorian limitations on women's independence, and you begin to see the storm cloud forming over the Borden household.
So, Dustin, I have a daughter. You have a daughter. And I'll say this, raising a daughter is different than raising a son. They need their privacy at times. I can't imagine being Lizzie or one of her sisters and just having, like, if company comes over, they have to trape through your bedroom or something just to get to the dining room or something. You know what I mean?
Well, I want to say the way the house was set up, I think you had to go. Did you have to go through? The parents had to go through Lizzie's room to get to theirs, or Lizzie had to go through theirs to get to hers. It was a very bizarre setup. And like you said, I mean, you want space, you want
Privacy.
time away, privacy. Women are emotional. Girls are emotional, especially in the young teenage years. They get super emotional, and not to have that chance to break away from everybody else and get away had to just seem like, constant control, constant manipulation.
Well, what's one thing Lizzie liked to do? She liked to read. And if I'm reading, I can't have people walking in and out. I'm going to be distracted. And Dustin, we know your ADHD is so bad.
I don't know if everybody's realized how ADD I am. Like, I have to be in a room, no noise, nothing outside, nothing inside, nothing to distract me if I'm going to sit down and read something.
Right.
In school, like, it just took a pin drop and I'm like, cool, I'm opening up the Stock Car magazine and I am reading about racing stuff, and I'm not reading the Catcher in the Rye. I'm not reading, The Giver, all those books I was supposed to read in high school. That was a waste of money because they never got open.
So let's talk about Lizzie's personality, the public and the private versions, maybe a little Jekyll and Hyde situation. So when we talk about Lizzie Borden, we have to acknowledge that there were really two versions of her, the public Lizzie and the private Lizzie. Publicly, she was charitable, polite, engaged in her church, active in the community, and well-spoken. So she was an outstanding citizen outside of the house. People described her as a modest but intelligent, quiet but observant, a woman who carried herself well and followed societal expectations. Nothing in her public life suggested anger or violence, but privately, you start to see hints of frustration creeping in. Lizzie loved travel and social clubs, and those experiences opened her eyes to the broader world, one very different from the rigid confines of her father's house. When she returned home from those trips, she reportedly felt the limitations of her environment even more sharply. Letters and statements from acquaintances suggested moments of emotional strain, not dramatic outbursts, but quieter signs, relentless dissatisfaction, and a longing for something beyond the walls of her home. Personality-wise, she wasn't volatile, she was contained. And sometimes the people who remain the calmest on the outside are the ones whose internal pressure slowly builds over time.
How many times do you hear people say that I never would have expected that from them?
Well, every time a criminal gets caught and you have their mother come in, right? Oh, he's that type of person. He wouldn't do that. He's such a good kid.
The neighbors and stuff. It's, you definitely have to realize what most people are the same inside the home and outside the home. Few people are a monster at home and they blend in society outside.
Well, then you got those people that are monsters at home and monsters at work. Right?
Yeah. Well, But, is this the case here? That's what we're trying to figure out and decipher. And that's where the psychology gets interesting. Lizzie's life wasn't marked by outwards rebellion. She didn't defy her father. She didn't challenge the church. She didn't behave scandalously. Instead, her resistance was passive and subtle, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. She would withdraw from family meals, retreat to her room, or spend extended time away from the home when possible. These aren't the actions of somebody who simply wasn't or was unhappy. They're actions of someone who feels trapped. And if you look at the Victorian era as a whole, women like Lizzie often lived in a state of suspended adolescence. They were adults in age, but children legally and in society, unable to make financial or personal decisions without male approval. When you layer the frustration onto a household dynamic already strained by emotional fractures and Andy Borden's suffocating frugalness, the result is a personality shaped by quiet resentment, not explosive anger, but a simmering sense of injustice and containment.
Right. So you're already starting to feel sorry for Lizzie. Let's face the facts. She's already lost her mother when she was a toddler. And Emma was older than her, right? So, I mean, that probably put a strain on Emma more than Lizzie. But you know what? Sisters talk. So I wonder if she's like, oh, yeah, but she's not our real mom. You know what I mean? And then to have Andrew's frugalness on top of that, you can see some definitely tension in the family. So let's talk a little bit about that early signs of tension and household conflict.
Early signs of tension real quick, though. But are we going to hear anything about what people say about the stepmom? Did she treat him the same way? Did she treat him differently?
And, you know, maybe she's like, I'm not your real mother anyway. Is she like the Cinderella stepmother, makes them do all the work? You know,
is it because there's some stuff that happens later that I know we're going to talk about.
Right.
But is there just, the girls, are they just, this isn't our mom and that's kind of our way of dealing with the grief? Or did they get met with something that set them over the edge to just rebel against her as being, a mother figure?
And let me just go ahead and put this in right here. Just because a child is rebellious doesn't make them a murderer either. That's why we're doing this series. That's why we're doing this series, because we want to know Lizzie Borden, the person, and we will come to the conclusion if she was innocent or guilty by the end of this. So sit back. It's going to be a long ride, and we hope you enjoy it.
I can't wait to get on my soapbox and tell you what I think.
I know.
That's down the road.
Yeah. So long before the murders, the Borden house was already charged with tension. One major issue revolved around property and inheritance. Andrew gifted a house to Abby's family, specifically her sister, and that decision infuriated the daughters. They saw it as a betrayal, a shifting of resources away from the Borden bloodline. That even sparked a noticeable rift. Lizzie stopped eating meals with the family for periods of time. The relationship between the sisters and Abby shifted from cool indifference to open resentment. Another source of conflict came through incidents of theft within the household. Items went missing, small objects, money, small valuables. In response, Andrew installed additional locks inside the house, which sent a strong message. He didn't trust the people under his own roof. Imagine living with locked doors between rooms, each barrier implying suspicious from father to daughters and daughters to stepmother. It fostered a climate of distance and paranoia. And I'm just telling you right now, if I am them girls, I am getting out of that house. But society probably had them locked in where that probably wasn't very reasonable or feasible at that time anyway, because she was such from a high family values.
How are you going to move out? You don't have a job.
You don't have money.
You don't have money yet. Like, there's going to be some stuff that we talk about later. But it's funny that you mentioned, the locked doors. And I'm sure you're going to get into this, but there was a break-in allegedly, and only stuff from the parents' room was taken. And the key to, I'm going to lock the door, but I'm going to leave this key on the mantle. So it's like, I know something, but I'm not going to say it, but I just want you to know that I know. So you see a little bit of maybe some mind games there. I'm sure in a little bit we're going to really dive into the dad because he's one of the victims, just like the stepmom. We're building the case for the stepmom, but we got to get to the dad. You know what I mean? Because that's, man, it's a dynamic that I can't imagine. And all of this created an emotional atmosphere that was frankly toxic. When small domestic disputes pile up, inheritance arguments, mistrust, jealousy, and silent resentment, they don't go away. They calcify. And in the Victorian families, they were emotional, expressive, and practically forbidden. Those tensions never get resolved. They sink deeper and deeper, forming a psychological sediment that later erupts under pressure. The Borden household was a perfect example. Lizzie and Emma, viewed by Abby as someone who inserted herself into their father's property decisions. Andrew viewed his daughters as ungrateful and overly concerned with money. Abby likely felt isolated and disrespected in her own home. Everyone coexisted, but nobody truly connected. There were no family dinners full of warmth, no intimate conversations, no emotional reconciliation, just a daily routine of polite distance. When you talk about murderers later in the series, we talk about murders later in the series, these early tensions become incredibly important because people don't just explode in a vacuum. The pressure slowly builds long before the breaking point.
Bride, have you ever heard people say, I just had something building up into me. I let something build up inside me till I just explode. And I think
I'm a teapot, man. I'll build up some pressure. I'll blow off a little bit of steam and I'm good until that next thing builds up.
But some people
don't have that valve.
No, some people hold on to it so long they become a volcano. And when they blow, they go off the deep end and you're like, I would have never expected that from them because let's face it, Dustin, as men, we kind of hide our emotions sometimes. We keep stuff bottled in because that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to protect our family. We're supposed to provide for our family. And when the stress gets to you, you don't have
sphincter breaks and it just goes everywhere.
And you really don't have anybody to talk to when something like that happens. You know what I mean? Whereas your kids, your brothers, your sisters, your parents, whoever, they can come to you with information, you know what I mean? And you have to juggle their emotions and all their, while keeping your own self under control. It's a juggling match, really.
And having daughters, and I'm sure you're the same way, you'll say something to your daughter, especially when they're a little bit younger, early teens, maybe late teens, you get on them about something and they take it personal. You're against me and all this. And it's like, no, I'm doing this to protect you.
It's not fair. Everybody else is doing it. I said, well, you're not everybody.
But then 20 minutes later, something doesn't go her way and she needs to talk. You go up there and you kind of hash it back out and you let them, hey, this is why cooler heads have prevailed. Let's talk about it. And then they kind of open back up to you. And you can talk and keep that sense of stability and safety and concern, everything that they feel in check. And you're not getting this there. They have to escape the household if they're lucky to get any type of break or sense of normalcy. To have somebody listen to them, to talk about them, to care about them. And it sounds like it was just the two daughters together, Abby, Lizzie and Emma, It's one of those that they only had each other.
Well, that, and what about Lizzie's maternal family from her mother? We're going to get into something about where they meet their maternal uncle here in a few episodes, but did they not have any contact with them? Did the dad not let them see that side of them? Was there anybody else, cousins, anything, or were they so busy? Hey, we live up on this hill now with real bathrooms that we don't have to deal with you peasants, if you will.
So just a little side note back into the ADD mind of Dustin. So I'm not going to mention the last name, but the Andersons were kind of a poor, we're Scots-Irish. You come over here, we hit the coal mines, we're working our butts off in however you can to survive. Meanwhile, the other side that the Andersons married into was a pretty wealthy family. And my great-great-great-grandmother, I think it was kind of shunned from the family for marrying outside of her class. And it's almost like the family, from what we're seeing now, the family sees it as they're below us. Yeah, it's family, but they're not on our level. We don't want to put ourselves out there with them socially because that may drag us down.
Mm-hmm.
It's below our class. It's below our means. And that's how things happened back then.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, it's you take one side of your family, you married outside of your social class. So let's kind of just, push you away and move on from you.
Right. So with all that being said, there is a psychological storm that is forming in this little girl's life, a young lady's life by now. So now that we've got all these pieces on board, you have a wealthy but frugal father who denied his daughter's comfort. I mean, give him a bathroom, give him privacy. If you want to buy a house for your wife's sister, buy your house or build an addition onto your own house for your kids, for crying out loud. A stepmother who never bridged the emotional divide. Sisters who clung to each other but felt increasingly suffocated by their environment. A household divided by silence or defined by silence with locked doors and unspoken resentment. And a young woman growing up in the shadow of expectations she couldn't escape. What you start to see is a psychological storm gradually gathering force. What's a hurricane do? It starts off as a little tropical storm. As it rotates in that sea and keeps moving, it gets stronger and stronger and stronger before it hits land. So these factors don't prove guilt or innocence of Lizzie, but they do create a portrait of a home where pressure simmered just beneath the surface. For Lizzie, the sense of confinement wasn't just physical, it was emotional, financial, and existential. And all that matters as we inch closer to the week of the murders in 1892.
And that's exactly why episode 1 is so important. Before we analyze the crime scenes or the courtroom transcripts, we have to understand why the household was such a powder keg. The psychology, the environment, the family relationships. They're the context that gives meaning to everything that follows. And that is what we're already seeing in the Borden home. It wasn't a place of harmony. It was a place of unspoken resentment, social restrictions, and mounting frustrations. This isn't saying Lizzie was destined for violence, but it doesn't show that the house was a fertile ground it does show the house was a fertile ground for disaster. Next time, we're going to dive in to another major piece of this puzzle, the Borden finances, the family business empire, how the money became both a blessing and a curse for everybody involved. Because in Lizzie Borden's case, money isn't just in the background. It's motive, it's pressure, it's power all at once. So join us next time as we continue the series. And remember, the deeper you dive,
the darker it gets.